feel sort of embarrassed introducing myself again, but given this is live streamed and there'll be people watch this online, I'll say it for the 35th time. I'm Tom Trowbridge, co-founder of Fluence. I'm happy to be here with Guy Wuollet, who is a partner on the a16z crypto team. He's focused on infrastructure and the application layer investments, and he's made a couple of DePIN investments we're going to talk about a little bit later. He's a Bachelor of Science at Stanford. And before a16z, he conducted research at Protocol Labs. So he was Protocol Labs, obviously the group behind Filecoin. So he was looking at DePIN before it was DePIN, is my guess.
That's a very kind way to put it. I'll take that. Thank you.
So excellent. So Guy, welcome. So
thank you.
Let's first talk about the definition of DePIN. This is, I think, we can get out of the way our disagreements right off the bat, because I know you've got a definition a little bit different than mine and different than some others here, but you got a lot of conviction. So how do you define DePIN first?
Sure. I think, I mean, it's useful to say these discussions are much more interesting when we disagree slightly. So I think a friendly disagreement is very good. At least to me, the portion of DePIN that I'm personally excited about, not to say the other things are not compelling, they are, but maybe we should name them differently. The P in DePIN is important to me, the physical aspect of it. And so when I think about what's compelling to me about DePIN products, network services, it's the idea that you can take the same innovation that has happened in bits over the last 50 years and apply it to atoms. And, crypto networks and incentives being one path by which you might do that. And so I think oftentimes today, DePIN means more or less I create a token and I can give that token to people to drive some behavioral change. And that is a wonderful use case for crypto, but that definition seems to be all encompassing to me. And so you lose a lot of the semantic value of DePIN, of the term, of the people that come here today and are interested in some of the things we're talking about. And so usually I think there are kind of three categories. There's the first of DePIN, which is let's create a token and give it to people to inspire some behavior. Then there are basically decentralized cloud projects, which maybe is a good way of describing what you guys are doing at Fluence, and then often gets lumped into DePIN, at least in my experience talking with people who are not deeply enmeshed in crypto. I have to explain to them what DePIN is for 15 minutes. And if I say decentralized cloud, they're like, oh, cool. That makes sense to me. And so I think that's usually why the semantic distinction is important to me. But I know other people have different approaches to this and would say things like Bitcoin mining are DePIN. So, maybe that's better for the happy hour later where we can have more of a spirited argument.
Well, I guess what I'd say is, I clearly put Bitcoin mining outside of it. Mine is crowdsourced physical infrastructure. We agree there. Performing a useful service, of which I don't think block production, that's my little block production exclusion. And then secured incentive by crypto economics. And so, but that does include cloud services because those are useful services. So but it sounds like you're not as much in disagreement with that as I thought you might be, because I do rule out the apps as well, which are crypto economic, yes, but aren't physical really.
Yeah. So one other lens I look at this through is I spend a lot of time, and one of the things I care a lot about when I talk to a DePIN project is how they're handling the verification problem. In a decentralized context, how are you ensuring the service the network is providing, be it cloud compute, storage, something else, or, be it the transfer of energy or transit via telecom? Like, how is that service verified in a decentralized context? And almost all DePIN projects take a very similar verification approach. They don't use classical consensus, and they don't use succinct or ZK proofs. And they don't use consensus or proofs because it's often too inefficient. And so, spending some time, I worked at Protocol Labs, as you said, and Filecoin, for instance, takes a very DePIN approach to verifying that files are actually stored and retrieved, although I would classify that as a digital service, file storage. And then I think you look at some of the recent AI projects that are very focused on decentralized inference or decentralized training, which again is very hard to form consensus over because you have too much overhead and it's not particularly efficient. And so they take a very DePIN approach to verification, often through random sampling or a mechanism like TrueBit that's more optimistic. And so I think that's another way to view this, which is things like consensus and proofs you can only form over a state transition function because it's fundamentally a computational or a digital representation. Whereas some of the DePIN projects that are focused on things more like energy is a physical thing. You can't reflect that on a blockchain without an oracle. So I guess another way of putting this would be, if you need an oracle, you are probably a DePIN project. If you don't need an oracle, perhaps you are or not a DePIN project. But that's maybe a less interesting way to say it because that's harder to argue about.
Much harder. Definitely true. Well, tell me. Let's then take that a step further. So, if you know a definition, then within that space, what do you look for in a DePIN project as a potential investment or as something that has a chance of success?
Yeah. Well, I'm first obligated to say that nothing I say is legal tax or investment advice. And second, I would say the thing I tend to most care about in meeting a project or person who's building a new DePIN protocol is both a mastery in the traditional or the DePIN domain and someone who is, really incredibly crypto native. And I think this is often the hard challenge is, I would put the three main industries that I'm particularly interested in personally in DePIN as being telecom, energy, and transportation. And if you go talk to traditional people in telecom, traditional people in energy, or traditional people in transportation, they usually don't know what crypto is and, they don't care. And so finding someone who has a really strong background as an electrical engineer and has, built power plants or worked on VPPs, and then also can do protocol design for a crypto project, that's a challenge. And so I think the simple answer to your question, first and foremost, would be, can we find people who, educate me and educate our team about some traditional industry, and then also can run circles around us on the crypto topics. That is what inspires me.
Well, I'm skeptical you're able to find people who run circles around you on the crypto topics. But I do. I am. But the point I think is that what we've seen in DePIN is a lot of people with very deep domain expertise in a wide range of sectors entering the space, and I think that crypto expertise is probably easier to adopt and to come by than the years and years of domain expertise in particular areas.
Yeah, I think one thing I have seen personally is it's very hard to teach someone protocol design or mechanism design. I rode in college, and our coach used to literally scream at us, "Can't teach it," about different things in practice. And I think that's very true in crypto as well. It's something that you can learn, but it's very hard to teach someone else. And so usually there's kind of a transformative process when someone becomes more interested in crypto. And a lot of people who were kind of previously interested in crypto came from academic backgrounds in computer science, came from something like online poker, or they were staunch libertarians. And maybe you have some sample of those people who come from more traditional industries, but I think what I am most inspired by about some of the DePIN projects is that they represent kind of crypto consumer to me. That oftentimes people ask, what are the use cases for crypto? And if you talk to a normal person and you explain to them how the telecom industry works today or the energy industry works today, no one is particularly satisfied about this. And if we can make meaningful changes in those kind of atrophying incumbent monopolies and pass on that benefit to consumers in their day-to-day life without them ever knowing they're using crypto, that is to me what's kind of inspiring. I think one version of improving crypto UX is making wallets better and faster and simpler, and the other is just plugging in a new crypto-powered backend to a product someone already uses and not requiring them to even be aware in any way, shape, or form that crypto exists or as an industry or, we've built it. But I'm very hopeful that will be the case in the coming years, and it's already starting to be that way today.
Well, and I guess there's a number of DePIN projects out there we can think of for whom the clients may be completely unaware that there's crypto on the back end and it's irrelevant to them really, right? And so that is, I guess, that's where you sort of the Intel Inside concept, right? Where you don't know about the token mechanics or plumbing because it doesn't really matter to the client anyway.
Yeah. I think this is my biggest personal transformation over the last couple of years. I became interested in crypto for crypto's sake, and it turns out a lot of the people I like and enjoy spending time with feel the same way, but the entire world is not going to be interested in crypto for crypto's sake. So I think like the victory for us as a space is very much like there are not internet companies or internet investment funds anymore. There's just, funds, and there are just companies. Everything uses the internet. You can't not touch it. When that is true for crypto or true for DePIN, when we stop having DePIN Day and it's just, day.
That's not next year. We need DePIN Day next year.
Well, I think this event will exist for many, many years, but hopefully you'll have to change the name at some point. That would be, I think, a fantastic win for everyone here.
Fair enough. Well, on those investments, how focused are you on crypto? You mentioned kind of protocol design. I assume that also means crypto economic design. So token economics. And so how focused are you on that? The founders have to have that baked in. They're gonna figure out over time kind of how do you think about that at the early stage that you're looking at these projects?
Yep. So I used to think like token design and protocol design were two different things, and they were different disciplines. And I think I've changed my mind on that. I think what is usually most important is if you're launching a token, it should have a very intentional purpose. And I think the best purpose for launching a token related to a DePIN project is that you're solving some incentive challenge in a decentralized network or context. Like Bitcoin has to exist because there was no native digital asset to transfer otherwise on that network, and you needed to reward miners for contributing. Like ETH has to exist to solve the consensus problem for Ethereum. And I think there are perhaps a lot of interesting, crypto-enabled businesses today that don't actually need native tokens. And where you don't need a token, I often think sometimes you're overcomplicating the product that you're delivering to the end user by introducing one. And so when I think about kind of mechanism design or token design or one of these things, what I am most compelled by personally about DePIN networks is building fundamentally a decentralized network. And when there's no one coordinating that network, oftentimes you have to create some incentive system. And that incentive system is oftentimes best served through the introduction of a native token or representation of value. I don't know that anyone has all of these details figured out already. I think this will certainly evolve as a space. And my hope is that in 5 years or 10 years, you can literally teach this the way you teach someone how to use it or build a database today. But I think it's still kind of in a nascent space. Maybe a good analog is the development of algorithmic game theory and, its relevance to spectrum auctions or ad auctions online developing between, 2000 and 2015, roughly. So I think the domain academically is still very nascent, and a lot of the examples that academics are inspired by are experiments people run in practice. So, to answer your question much more succinctly, I don't think anyone has to have these ideas figured out, but someone who's thought deeply about them is always interesting to me.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think the way, I sort of have come to think about it over time is that the project almost has to serve the token value. And if it doesn't, someone else will figure out a way in that same sector to do the same and may outcompete you. And that's sort of the reverse way of looking at it to some extent, but I sort of think that's where it may go.
Yeah. Well, I think there's the old engineer's adage that something is not finished when there's nothing more to add. It's finished when there's nothing more to take away. And especially being someone who focuses on crypto and on DePIN and being, I love every project that has a token, but I would much prefer if there's nothing left to take away from a protocol or a mechanism design. Like if you can remove the token and it still exists, then perhaps that's a good idea. If the app you're building, like you can remove the on-chain component and it still works just as well, perhaps you shouldn't use a blockchain. Maybe these are counterintuitive things for crypto people to think or believe, but I really do appreciate when someone is able to say, we need every component here. It really serves a purpose, because I think sometimes very smart and, crypto-focused people love complexity, which is really interesting and perhaps great for marketing. Like the white paper era of crypto, I think a lot of the reason the most technically complex projects did well was it demonstrated competence amongst the team and inspired a community to spend more time on the project. But now I think we need to convince people to care about these things because the product is great, not just because the research is great.
Yeah, I mean, that's a true point. I'll just add one point. The technically deep white papers would attract the technical experts who had big followings and would then attract everyone else that followed them, right? So it was a technical loop, effectively, of expertise and a shortcut to credibility, effectively. So
I think the difference is if you're building a developer community, you probably should have a white paper because you could nerd snipe people and those devs come and build on your platform. But if you're building an end user product, like I don't know about your family, but no one else in my family wants to read the white paper. They just want to use the app or want to use the product.
Well, and that goes to the next thing. DePIN, it's not but white paper that's going to generate interest. It's revenue, right? And so that yes. I know we agree on. So let's dig into on that point, kind of one of the energy sector. I know you did an investment in Daylight. And love to hear kind of explain a minute on Daylight. Jason, the founder, has been on stage here. He's been on the DePIN podcast. But if you wouldn't mind, explain a little bit about Daylight and kind of what and how you think about it.
You should definitely go listen to his podcast, by the way. It's excellent. I'll give you kind of my brief background or interest in energy. So when I was working at Protocol Labs, I worked in the independent research group, and one of the other projects was literally called the Decentralized Energy Project and was focused on this idea of can you build microgrids or can you build peer-to-peer energy? And so it's been sort of something floating around in the back of my mind, and I have to thank Juan and PL for that. And so Daylight is today essentially a network that's trying to aggregate information about the state of the energy grid and then sell that information to utilities or other participants in the grid to help better manage the grid. So this, maybe you already know this, maybe you don't, but oftentimes there's a physical truck that will drive through your neighborhood with a shortwave radio that will collect information from your energy meter, which is, a very antiquated and I would argue bad approach to how you aggregate information about the energy usage at your house. The other kind of relevant trend for this, I think, is the idea that more and more energy generation in the form of something like a solar panel on your roof or storage in the form of a battery like a Tesla Powerwall in your garage is being pushed to the edge of the energy grid. And so as that is happening, I think that's kind of a secular trend more broadly, utility companies have less and less visibility into how the energy grid is being managed, and they care more and more about this information. It's hard to come by. And so Daylight and, there are a bunch of other companies working in this space as well, are stepping in to try to address this challenge. I think in the fullness of time, the other thing that excites me is not just you can aggregate information about the state of the energy grid, but you can actually rent access to the solar panel on your roof or, the battery in your garage. And a lot of the cost, so to speak, in an energy grid comes from times of peak demand. Meaning when it's super hot outside and everyone wants to run their air conditioner, energy can become very, very expensive. And so simply having a little bit of latent capacity at the edge of the network that you can use to load balance can be very, very valuable. And this is a broader trend, separate from and outside of crypto, the idea of a virtual power plant, meaning a power plant that is not a single building, burning coal or a nuclear power plant, but is the aggregation of a bunch of solar panels, a bunch of wind farms, a bunch of batteries that can be used for demand response in times of peak load. I think the other component to me that's compelling about energy is we have a different team called the American Dynamism team that's focused on basically energy, defense, manufacturing investments. And one of the partners on that team wrote a blog post called Decentralizing the Energy Good. And I don't know about you, but very rarely do I hear non-crypto people laud decentralization. And so when that happened, my ears pricked up and I became much more interested in this space. And now there's a whole group of these decentralized energy projects, which I'd like to rebrand degen from meaning degenerate to decentralized generative energy networks. So let's start that right here.
Yeah, let's see how long that lasts. But I do like it. Let's get some degen t-shirts for everybody.
Perfect.
What how many? But back to that Daylight investment. Yes. How many projects in that space, in the degen space, did you look at before settling on Daylight? And are you still looking at projects in that space?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think the reason calling it degen is interesting is you need a category name. So much like there are lots of different interesting things in DeFi. I hope there will be lots of interesting things in degen. I think I personally probably have met 30 or 35 decentralized energy projects. I imagine there are a lot more that I have not met. There are only so many hours in the day, and it is impossible to meet everyone. But I'm absolutely very interested in meeting other people who are focused on that set of ideas.
But that's just interesting. So meet 35 in a sector you like, invested in one. Are there others you may invest in, or is it kind of too hard to make the bar?
No, the approach I think through with this is, you try to meet as many interesting, compelling people building cool stuff as possible. And it is very much not about, trying to hit some metric or have some, for X there is Y. It's much more, I got to know Jason, who's the founder of the project Daylight, over a couple of years, and it over time became very obvious to me that it would be a lot of fun to work together and that he's building something super, super cool. And so, it took me longer maybe than it probably should have, but I became very convinced that he's building something worth supporting, and I'm super happy that I get to spend more time with him on it.
Terrific. Well, let's move to decentralized compute. So
yes.
It's another area. I think there's a couple of examples of centralized AI leading to kind of bizarre outcomes that make clear the pressures on these centralized companies. You've got Google Gemini image creator, which created crazy bizarre images in the past. You have OpenAI refusing to use certain kinds of jokes. You've got all kinds of things. You've got Grok, which now allegedly is being tweaked by Elon for whatever reason. Maybe not. We're not sure. So, I think you've invested in decentralized GPU or decentralized trainer Jensen. So can you talk a little bit about decentralized GPUs, decentralized AI, and Jensen in that context?
Yeah, it's worth noting to start with, I work on our crypto team. We have an AI team, and we overlap quite a bit, but they are different things on our team. The first point I guess would make is decentralized AI is a very amorphous concept. And the first thing that I care about personally is the idea that these models can and should be open source. And so if all of this is run closed source by a very small number of companies, I think there's a potential future where you go back to like television with 3 or 5 stations, which is not particularly a world I want to live in. So I think first and foremost, the idea of having open source AI models, marketplaces, approaches to inference and training is important. And then thinking about, what are the actual networks, not just open source libraries. Well, the obvious bottleneck, especially in the past couple of years to training models, has been getting access to GPUs and getting access to compute, period. And so there have been a bunch of different projects that are trying to aggregate decentralized compute or, GPUs specifically for the purpose of doing training and inference. And I think what inspired me most about Jensen, which we're investors in, as you mentioned, was the idea that they had taken a really interesting approach to verification. We were talking about this a little bit earlier. And so if you want to run the most performant cutting edge LLMs, well, you can't form consensus over them because the overhead, the cost would be so high that for almost any use case, it's really too expensive. And the same challenge exists for ZK proofs. So really the two verification approaches that seem possible are trusted hardware, where you have something like an H100 that has a secure element on it. It's not really an enclave, but you can think of it that way. Or an optimistic approach, which I think is, in their case, is inspired by TrueBit, the 2017 era project that was building what I think you probably would call today an optimistic coprocessor. And so, I got to know them, I think, at the end of 2021, and over about a year, it just became very clear that they had a set of unique insights about how you verify training of a decentralized model. One of the other hard challenges that we haven't talked about at all is how you create a single deterministic trace for training an AI model, because there's an element of entropy, of randomness involved in both inference and training. And can you get a large network of different people to agree on kind of a standard execution trace? And that's something they've worked on quite a bit. Also worth noting that they have a number of announcements this week about their testnet and have open sourced some of the code. So if you're interested in this sort of thing, I would encourage you to Google or go on Twitter, and I anticipate you will not miss it.
So help us understand decentralized compute. I guess we can stick to the GPU side for a moment.
Sure.
How big do you think that market can be? Help people understand the world as you expect it could happen.
Sure. I think the most optimistic version of this would be like the demand for intelligence is perhaps very, very high, if not unlimited. And so that then says, well, the demand for the efficient way to run intelligence, which today is a GPU, is very, very high. And then this kind of dovetails with what we were talking about earlier in energy. Perhaps now today the bottleneck is not getting access to chips, but perhaps the bottleneck is having access to energy, period. And so I'm kind of very optimistic that the more energy and compute you can throw at these models, the better it will be for the world. But that is perhaps kind of an EAC take. So I think maybe other people will disagree with me on that, and I'll be happy to fight that fight.
Fair enough. And there's a number of decentralized GPU marketplaces out there, but I think it's important to clarify to people, and I think you started doing it, how different Jensen is, because it's not a marketplace. It's actually, because that's what the quick thing would be, right? Oh, marketplace. There's IO, there's Akash, right? There's a whole number, but Jensen actually is doing a more sophisticated version of actually training and verifying that, right? I just want to make that point clear, because it's not, the default is to think about GPU marketplaces, which supposedly address the shortage of GPUs.
Yeah, I think it'd be hard to build a fully trustless GPU marketplace without something like what Jensen has proposed. I know other projects have taken a different approach, and I think that's kind of the beauty of markets, is that different people have different opinions, and we can see what succeeds. I'm very optimistic about the entire space, and I'm very glad people have different opinions than me and then them and then us. It would be very boring if we all agreed.
Well, but also I'll go a little deeper. If you think that the demand for intelligence is effectively infinite, then the demand for energy is, and demand for compute would be. Are there other investments? Are there other companies? Are you actively looking in that space? How do you think about? There must be lots of opportunity if you have such infinite demand.
Yeah, I kind of the inputs that we're talking about to these models. One being energy, and I think if you look at like energy consumption against quality of life, it's pretty much directly correlated. The more energy you consume, the higher quality of life, which is obviously subjective. Then compute being an input, but the third being data. And so I don't know that there's really a good scaled data marketplace that exists today. I think some people might quote something like Scale AI, which is perhaps not a marketplace in the sense that we might consider in crypto networks. And so I think that's kind of the other big opportunity, which I'm particularly interested in, and is maybe much more relevant as the existing models have scraped a lot of the internet today. There isn't a lot more data that you can just go collect passively. And so finding the right way to take private data or siloed data and then make that available to these models, and then having a framework for compensating people who contribute data, I think is also a very interesting and very hard technical question. I anticipate in the course of due time that it will not be true that big companies will just passively collect all of our data and there will not be any sort of economic flow that goes back to people who create that data. But again, I'm often wrong, so we'll see.
Fair enough. I mean, and I think that was, you hit my question before that I even asked about where the opportunities are. You've answered that. So help us understand then, we're at DePIN Day. How important do you think DePIN is? How big can DePIN be as a sector? Paint that, whether it's, you've talked about energy and data and AI, thinking about either just those subsectors overall, where do you think DePIN kind of goes, and how, when, where?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the focus in energy in crypto the last couple of years has been improving crypto things, which is fantastic, but is inherently, limited. And so another way of viewing DePIN is applying the same principles that have been used to build things like Ethereum and Solana to the rest of the world. And I mean, things we haven't talked about at all. Can you apply these same sort of principles to education or healthcare, which comprise a massive component of the economy in America and globally, and have not really been effectively touched or disrupted by tech? And so I'm sure people disagree with that. But I think there are lots of opportunities beyond what we're just talking about in a purely computational sense to build and coordinate services that are the underlying infrastructure for our daily lives. Like, another way of viewing why crypto is interesting, and one of the things that has inspired me, is that anyone can propose new ways to coordinate markets or communities or societies. And I think when you expand access and opportunity and let people who otherwise wouldn't have the credentials that certainly I do, and I think a lot of people here do, when you open up that space and let more people contribute, I'm just kind of very optimistic about the sum total of human talent and intelligence, and that should be applied not just to financial services and DeFi or cloud computing with things like you're doing and L1s, but that should be applied to kind of every sector of the economy and everything that people care about. And so I think that's one way I think about DePIN, and in that framing, the opportunity is very, very large. So hopefully there will be a lot more people here next year, and hopefully we will just call it day at some point. And
DePIN eats the world. You've heard it here. It's the new Mark Andreessen comment, not software, but DePIN, right? We'll put that. That's a quote we're gonna have.
I'll let Mark speak for himself, but yes, I think DePIN will do very, very well.
Excellent. Listen, thank you for joining. Appreciate it. Let's have a round of applause for Guy.
Thank you, Tom.